The desert stretched wide beneath the dying light, an ocean of dust and silence, where wind whispered across broken stones and the bones of forgotten cattle trails. A single rider moved through it, his shape rising like a mirage from the wavering horizon. His horse stumbled on the hard ground, its ribs showing through a coat thick with travel dust. The man's hat was tilted low against the sun, his face carved with lines of exhaustion and memory. His name was Colt Mercer, a drifter who had once chased gold, then redemption, and now only the mercy of distance. He rode until the sky burned red behind him and shadows spilled long and thin before his path. When he reached the valley's edge, he saw the smoke-first black pillar twisting upward from a canyon hollow. He urged his horse forward, the smell of burning wood growing stronger with every stride. What he found stopped him cold. A wagon lay overturned, its canvas in ashes, its wheels broken like snapped ribs. The sand around it was dark with dried blood. 2 Apache hunters lay dead beside the wreck, their faces turned toward the west, as if watching the sun die. Colt dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the hot sand, the wind pressing against his shirt. "Dear God," he muttered, kneeling beside one of the fallen. No gun lay near them, only tracks 3 sets of horses, heading north, fast. Whoever had done this was gone, leaving Colt to face what remained. He had no time to move before a sharp whistle split the air. From the ridges above came voices, shouts in Apache, and the glint of spears catching the sun. Colt raised his hands, but the arrows came quick, thudding into the dirt at his feet. A dozen riders poured down the slope, their horses kicking dust, their faces painted for war. The leader, broad-shouldered and solemn, reined in before him, his eyes dark and steady. "You stand where our brothers fell," he said in broken English. "Their blood is still warm." Colt tried to speak, but his throat had turned to dust. "It wasn't me," he said. "I just found them." The man dismounted, his movements slow and certain, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. The warriors closed in, ropes ready, eyes cold. Colt knew there'd be no convincing them. Now the desert had already chosen its story. As they bound his hands and led him toward the cliffs, the last light faded, and the smoke behind them curled like a dying spirit against the sky. Night came crawling over the desert like a slow tide of shadow, swallowing what little mercy the sun had left behind. The Apache warriors rode in silence, their prisoner bound to a spare horse, dust ghosting around their hooves with every step. Colt Mercer's wrists burned against the rawhide cords, the sting mixing with sweat and blood. The land rolled endlessly beneath them, barren yet alive with unseen motion, the cry of a hawk, the scuttle of something small in the sand, the sigh of wind curling between the rocks. He had ridden these lands before, back when freedom had felt like a companion instead of a ghost. Now every ridge looked like a sentence, every horizon a door that would never open again. The lead rider, the man who had spoken at the canyon, said nothing as they moved. His name, Colt later learned, was Dakota, chief of the Red Mesa people. His eyes never wavered from the path ahead, but his silence carried authority heavier than iron. When the stars began to rise, they reached a plateau where torches flickered against the dark, forming a circle of light around the Apache camp. Shadows moved within it, women tending fires, men sharpening blades, children peering from behind hides with wide, curious eyes. As the riders entered, the drums began, a low heartbeat pulsing through the ground. Colt was pulled from his horse and forced into the center of the circle. He could feel the eyes on him, hundreds, silent, unyielding. The chief dismounted, his long braids swaying with the motion. He studied Colt for a long time, then spoke in his own tongue. His voice was deep, rolling, filled with something older than anger. One of the younger warriors translated, his tone hard and formal. "You are found beside our dead," he said. "Their blood is on your trail. You will answer to the spirits when the sun returns." Colt's voice cracked, but held steady. "You're wrong," he said quietly. "I found them that way." His words disappeared into the wind. Tokuda lifted a hand. The crowd fell silent. "The spirits will decide," he said through the translator. "If you speak truth, they will show it. If not, your bones will join theirs in the canyon." The warriors shoved Colt to his knees, binding him to a post beside the largest fire. Sparks rose into the night, swirling upward like lost souls seeking escape. Beyond the flames, he caught a glimpse of a woman standing apart from the others, her face calm yet searching. The firelight shimmered against her dark eyes and the beads woven into her hair. For a heartbeat, she and Colt locked eyes, and something unspoken passed between them, curiosity, perhaps, or the faint scent of fate beginning to stir. The moon rose pale over Red Mesa, washing the desert in a silver stillness that felt older than memory. The drums had gone quiet, but their echo lingered in the night air, like the heartbeat of something ancient buried beneath the sand. Colt Mercer sat bound beside the dying fire, his back against a wooden post, his wrists raw from the cords that bit into them. The smoke from the embers drifted lazily toward the sky, carrying the bitter scent of sage and ash. Around him, the Apache camp slept in fragment scards, awake in the shadows. Others wrapped in hides, resting beside the flickering light of smaller fires. The night was cold enough to bite through his coat, and every gust of wind carried a whisper through the rocks, a sound that might have been the desert itself breathing. He lifted his head, staring at the cliffs beyond the camp, their edges sharp as blades under the moon. Somewhere up there, coyotes cried, lonely and far away. His horse was gone, his gun taken, and with it the only thing that had ever made him feel safe. He wondered if anyone had believed him innocent since the day the rope first touched his wrists. He wondered if it even mattered anymore. A soft sound broke the stillness, footsteps in sand, slow and deliberate. Colt turned his head. A woman approached from the shadows, moving like part of the night itself. It was Hertha, one he had seen by the fire, the chief's daughter, Ayana. The torchlight caught her face, revealing a calm that seemed carved from moonlight. She carried a clay bowl of water and knelt beside him, setting it down carefully. "Drink," she said, her voice low, her English soft but clear. Colt hesitated, then drank the water, cool and sharp against his cracked lips. "Why help me?" he asked, his voice rough. She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Because the desert listens," she said, "and I do not think it heard lies in your voice." Her words lingered, strange and heavy. Then she stood, turning to go. The wind rose suddenly, lifting her dark hair and scattering the ashes of the fire. For a heartbeat, Colt saw her eyes in the moonlight, filled with questions she couldn't yet ask. When she disappeared into the tents beyond, the night closed in again, wrapping him in silence. Somewhere to the east, thunder rolled faintly behind the mountains. Colt watched the clouds gathering, his breath shallow, his fate waiting in the storm to come. The first light of dawn came slow over the desert, painting the cliffs in shades of rose and rust. The camp awoke in murmurs and the smell of burning sage, the air heavy with the weight of ritual. Warriors gathered in a wide circle before the sacred fire, their faces marked with white ash and ochre. Smoke rose like a living thing, coiling upward toward the blood-red sun. Colt Mercer stood at the center, his wrists still bound, though someone had loosened the ropes during the night. His eyes stung from lack of sleep, and the silence pressed against him like a wall. Across the circle sat Chief Tokoda, proud and unbending, his expression carved from stone. Behind him, the tribe's elders waited, their gaze steady and ancient. The chief spoke in Apache, his voice deep as thunder rolling through a canyon. When the translation came through one of the younger braves, Colt learned that this was not a trial in any way he understood it, was a reckoning between his soul and the spirits of the land. He was accused of killing 2 Apache scouts near the San Pedro River and stealing their horses. He knew the accusation, but hearing it under the dawn sky, surrounded by eyes that burned with centuries of grief, made it feel heavier than any gallows could. Colt lifted his head. "I didn't kill them," he said. His words fell into the sand like stones into a well, swallowed by the wind. Chief Tokoda didn't move. "You speak for yourself," he said through the translator, "but who will speak for the dead?" No one answered. For a long time, only the fire crackled, the sound sharp in the still morning air. Then, from the edge of the circle, Ayanna stepped forward, her presence cutting through the murmurs like the first blade of light over the horizon. She carried a feather in one hand, a symbol of truth among her people. "Let the spirits decide," she said softly. And though her voice was quiet, every head turned toward her. The chief's eyes narrowed. "You would call upon the spirits for him?" She nodded once. "Yes, because I have seen his eyes, and they do not carry death." A murmur rippled through the crowd, uncertain and uneasy. The chief rose slowly, his shadow long in the dawn light. "Then the desert will decide his truth," he said. He gestured to the guards. They dragged Colt to his knees beside the fire as the drums began to beat again, low and rhythmic, echoing across the canyon. Above them, a hawk cried, circling in the reddening sky. "Somewhere beyond the mountains," thunder answered. The sun climbed from the horizon like a blade drawn from fire, spilling light across the endless sands of the Arizona territory. Colt Mercer walked barefoot, his hands unbound now, but his fate sealed by the eyes that had watched him go. The Apache had sent him into the desert at Dono Water. No horse, no weapon, only the promise that if his spirit was true, the desert would spare him. If not, it would take him. He could still hear the echo of the drums fading behind him, slow and mournful, until they vanished into the wind. The air shimmered with heat, bending the cliffs and mesas into mirages that danced at the edge of sight. His throat was already dry, his breath ragged. Every step kicked up a small ghost of dust that clung to his boots and settled in his hair. Around him, the desert stretched wide and merciless, alive with silence so deep it seemed to breathe. The wind shifted, carrying whispers that weren't quite wind, half memory, half echo. He saw shapes in the distance, the shimmer of riders moving through the heat waves. For a heartbeat, he thought they were coming for him. But when he blinked, they were gone, leaving only the lonely sweep of the dunes. His mind wandered back to the night by the San Pedro, the gunfire, the shouting, the confusion of smoke and fear. He remembered finding the Apache scouts after the fight already dead, arrows and bullets tangled in the dirt. He had tried to bury them before riding off, but someone had seen him. That had been enough. Guilt and truth tangled in his chest like barbed wire. The sun climbed higher, and the world became a furnace. He fell to his knees near a patch of dry brush, panting, the taste of dust thick on his tongue. A vulture circled overhead, slow and patient. He thought of water, of shade, of the sound of Ayana's voice in the night. The desert listens. The words came back like a prayer. He closed his eyes and listened in for a moment. The wind changed. It carried something softer this time, like music. When he opened his eyes, the air before him shimmered, and through the wavering heat, a figure began to take shape. A man in worn buckskins, his chest painted white, his face shadowed. The figure spoke in Apache, though Colt somehow understood. You carry death, but not murder. Prove the difference. Then the vision dissolved, leaving the cowboy trembling in the silence. The wind whispering again, colder now, as if it had come from the grave. The desert had no mercy left. By midday, the sun burned white as molten steel, and Colt Mercer staggered through the dunes like a ghost, still trying to remember the shape of his body. His lips had cracked, his tongue was dry sand, and his shadow had shortened into nothing beneath him. Each step was an act of will, a quiet rebellion against the weight of the world. The wind had died to a breathless silence, and even the circling vulture had drifted away, bored of his endurance. When he fell, the ground rose to meet him like the earth had been waiting. He lay still for a moment, staring at the sky so vast, so blinding that it seemed almost to swallow him. Then, from somewhere deep within the stillness, came a sound, not of wind or life, but of drums. They were faint at first, distant echoes trembling through the bones of the desert. He raised his head. The horizon shimmered, and through the haze came the ghostly outlines of riders, a dozen or more, galloping toward him across the sand. But as they drew nearer, he saw they cast no shadows. Their faces were painted in ash, their eyes empty as the sun. They formed a circle around him, and the leader dismounted, a tall Apache warrior with a scar that cut from temple to jaw. The spirits have judged before, the vision said in a voice that seemed to come from the wind itself. They ask now if your heart remembers truth. Colt struggled to his knees. I didn't kill your men, he rasped. I tried to save them. The warrior tilted his head. Then show us. The desert wind surged. In an instant, the world shifted. Sand became riverbank, heat became smoke, and Colt stood again by the San Pedro in that cursed twilight of memory. Gunfire cracked from both sides. He saw himself ducking for cover behind a rock, his rifle empty, watching as two Apache scouts fell under the bullets of bandits wearing Union coats. He ran toward them, shouting, but it was too late. He dragged one man's body from the river, trying to save the other, when a shot grazed his shoulder. The scene froze in place of dead, the smoke, the river like blood under the moonlight. The warrior's voice thundered again. shaking the vision apart. You carry the truth and the burden. Both are yours to bear. The illusion shattered, and Colt collapsed back into the sand, gasping as real thunder rolled across the desert. When he looked up, clouds were gathering black and heavy, the kind that bring rain or ruin. Far behind him, Ayanna rode hard through the canyon, her hair flying like a dark banner in the wind. She had taken her father's horse and defied the tribe's will. Lightning flashed ahead of her, illuminating Colt's figure in the distance, kneeling beneath the storm's coming wrath. And in that heartbeat between thunder and silence, the desert held its breath, waiting for the Rainor for judgment. The storm came down like the fury of gods. The sky, once a sea of blue fire, turned black with clouds that rolled and twisted like smoke from an ancient war. Ayanna urged her father's horse through the canyon, the animal's hooves striking sparks against the stone. Rain began to fall slow at first, fat drops that darkened the sand, then harder, faster, until the desert itself seemed to weep. Her hair clung to her face, her breath short in the rising wind, but she did not stop. She had heard the elders' voices as she rode away, warning that no spirit would forgive a woman who interfered with judgment. But something stronger than fear had taken hold of her, a quiet certainty that what lived in Colt Mercer's eyes was not the reflection of a killer, but of a man hunted by his own ghosts. When she reached the open plain, lightning split the sky in a white scream of light, revealing Colt kneeling in the sand, drenched, broken, his face turned toward the heavens as if begging for a sign. She leaped from her horse and ran to him, the storm swirling around them in wild circles of dust and rain. "You must leave this place," she shouted over the thunder. "The desert has chosen." He looked up, dazed, barely recognizing her through the curtain of rain. "It's not done with me yet." His voice was hoarse, half swallowed by the wind. She knelt beside him, her hand gripping his shoulder. "If you stay, it will take your soul. If you go, you may still find your life." He met her eyes, and for the first time since his capture, something like peace flickered there, brief, fragile, but real. A gust of wind roared through the canyon, carrying the sound of distant hooves. Warriors, they had followed her. Ayanna turned, her heart pounding. Shadows emerged from the Apache riders, torches struggling against the storm's wrath. At their head rode Chief Dakota, his cloak soaked, his eyes blazing with betrayal and grief. He dismounted without a word, the rain streaming from his hair and beard. "You have defied the spirits," he said, his voice cutting through the storm like a blade. Ayanna rose to face him, her chin lifted. "The spirits showed him truth," she said. "They showed me mercy." The chief's gaze shifted to Colt, who stood unsteady beside her. For a moment, the old man's eyes softened, then hardened again like stone against tide. "Mercy is for the innocent," he said. Lightning cracked, and thunder rolled like judgment itself. The horse behind Dakota reared, frightened, and in that instant, the storm broke, fully open-wined, screaming, sand flying, fire from the sky striking the cliffs. Ayanna's voice was lost in the chaos as Colt reached for her hand. Around them, the world dissolved into noise, fury, and light. The storm devoured the desert. Wind tore through the canyon with the sound of screaming spirits, and lightning fell so close the ground split open with each strike. Rain poured in blinding sheets, turning sand into rivers and dunes into waves that shifted and collapsed beneath every step. Colt Mercer stood with Ayanna at his side, their bodies pressed against the force of the storm, barely upright as thunder cracked above them. Chief Dakota's warriors tried to circle, but the wind scattered horses and men alike. Through the chaos, the chief's voice rose a command, a plea, a prayer no one could tell which. The storm had become something unearthly, as though the spirits themselves had come down to bear witness to what would be decided here. Colt tried to pull Ayanna back toward the canyon wall for shelter, but she shook her head, shouting through the roar, "The spirits are not angry, they are watching." Lightning illuminated her face, fierce and radiant, her hair streaming in the wind like a banner of defiance. The chief dismounted again, struggling forward through the rain, his face streaked with mud and sorrow. "Enough," he cried, his voice shaking with power. "This man has brought the storm. His presence defies the land." Colt met his gaze through the rain, voice hoarse but steady. "Maybe it's not me they're angry at. Maybe it's what we all carry." For a moment, everything stilled. The wind fell to a whisper, the thunder faded into distance, and all that remained was the sound of rain dripping from the cliffs. The chief looked at the young man before him, broken, unarmed, yet standing with his daughter in defiance of fear. He saw not an enemy, but a reflection of his own grief, years buried beneath tradition and blood. Then, as the next flash of lightning tore across the horizon, a sudden rumble echoed above a wall of rock, loosened by the storm, sheared free from the cliffside. Dakota saw it first. Without thought, he lunged forward, shoving Ayanna out of its path as Colt tried to pull them both clear. The rock crashed down between them, spraying mud and stone. When the dust settled, the chief lay pinned beneath the edge of the fallen boulder, his breath shallow, his body broken. Ayanna screamed, falling to her knees beside him. Colt knelt too, pushing with all his strength, but the stone barely shifted. "Leave it," Dakota gasped. "The land has spoken." Rain streamed down his face. The storm was ours to face. He turned to his daughter, his voice softening. "Protect him. His life carries what mine cannot." And with that, his eyes closed, his body going still as the storm finally began to ease. The thunder rolled away into the distance, and a thin beam of sunlight pierced the clouds, falling across the three of them to living, one gone like a blessing from the heavens. When the last echo of thunder rolled away beyond the mesas, the desert was left trembling in silence. Rain still fell in soft, uneven drops, the storm's anger fading into a slow weeping that darkened the sand and carved small rivers through the earth. The bodies of men and horses lay scattered like forgotten prayers, their spirits claimed by the storm's fury. The air smelled of wet dust, of death and rebirth tangled together. Colt Mercer stood motionless beside the fallen chief, the weight of what had happened pressing on him heavier than the desert itself. Ayanna knelt near her father's body, her hands trembling as she wiped mud and rain from his face. Her breath came shallow, her eyes red, but no tears fell. She had already wept her soul dry. The warriors around them stood in uneasy silence, unsure whether to mourn or to condemn. Some glared at Colt, others at the sky, as if waiting for another sign from the spirits. Colt took a slow step back, his boots sinking into the soft earth. "I didn't mean," he began, but his voice faltered under the weight of the tribe's stare. Ayanna looked up, her face pale against the dark clouds. "He saved me," she said, her voice steady though soft. "My father gave his life for truth, not for vengeance." Her words hung in the air, trembling like the last drops of rain on a branch. No one moved. Finally, an elder stepped forward, a man with hair silver as dawn and eyes that had seen too many winters. He raised his hand for silence. "The land took what was owed," he said. "The storm has ended. Let the spirits rest." The others slowly nodded, their anger dimming to weary acceptance. They began to gather the wounded and the dead, wrapping them in hides, speaking prayers that rose softly into the cooling air. Colt knelt beside Ayanna, unsure what to say. "He was a good man," he whispered. She looked at him, her face unreadable. "He believed strength was found in silence. But you made him see that mercy has a voice too." The words broke something inside him, a crack through the armor he had built from years of regret and loss. He wanted to speak, to tell her everything about the guilt he'd carried, the battles he'd fought, the men he'd buried. But the desert held them both in its quiet grip, and the only sound was the slow, deliberate fall of rain. In the distance, sunlight began to pierce the clouds, thin golden rays touching the wet sand and making it shimmer like a field of glass. The storm's rage had given way to something almost wholly a fragile peace that felt undeserved. Colt reached down, his fingers brushing the edge of the chief's cloak. "I'll bury him myself," he said. Ayanna nodded, and together they began to dig beneath the soft red earth, the sound of their hands against the mud echoing like a heartbeat in the quiet dawn. They buried Chief Dakota at the mouth of the canyon where the storm had broken the land. The morning light glowed faint and golden, stretching long shadows across the wet ground. The air still carried the scent of rain, clean and sharp, mixed with the smoke of the fires the tribe had lit for mourning. Ayanna walked ahead of the others, wrapped in her father's cloak, her face calm though her eyes were hollow from sleepless hours. Colt followed behind her, his boots sinking into the softened earth, the edges of his coat heavy with mud. The tribe moved in silence, each man and woman carrying stones to build the cairn that would mark the chief's rest. Above them, a lone hawk circled, its cry thin against the brightening sky. The earth was softer than expected, as if the land itself had opened in sorrow. Colt dropped to his knees beside the grave, his hands digging deep into the red clay. Each handful felt like penance. He did not know the words of their prayers, but the rhythm of the shovels, the sound of earth meeting earth, became its own kind of hymn. Ayanna knelt beside him, laying a small carved figure atop her father's chest, a falcon made from bone, wings outstretched. "He carved it when I was a child," she said quietly. "He told me it would guard my path when his eyes could no longer watch." Colt's throat tightened. "Then he still watches," he murmured. She looked at him, and for the first time since the storm, her gaze softened. The sun climbed higher, painting their faces in gold as the tribe gathered around. The elders chanted softly, their voices low and steady, carrying across the canyon. The sound echoed off the cliffs, blending with the wind until it seemed the land itself was singing. When the last stone was placed, Ayanna pressed her palm to the top of the cairn, whispering something too soft for Colt to hear. Then she stood and turned to him, "The tribe will not harm you now," she said, "but they will not let you stay." Colt nodded, his jaw tight. "I don't expect them to." She stepped closer, her cloak brushing against him. "Where will you go?" He looked toward the horizon, endless, blinding, alive with the light of another beginning. "Wherever the desert forgives me," he said. The words hung between them like smoke. Behind them, the tribe began to disperse, their silhouettes moving slow through the mist of morning. Ayanna lingered by the grave, her hand finding his. Neither spoke. The silence between them was heavier than any storm. As the sun broke fully over the cliffs, the hawk cried once more and soared toward the rising light. Colt watched it go, feeling something inside him lift with it, not freedom, not peace, but a fragile promise that neither death nor distance could erase. The desert lay quiet after the storm, its silence deep and endless, as though the earth itself were listening for something it could no longer hear. Colt Mercer rode beneath a sun that burned white and pitiless above the mesas, the heat shimmering across the horizon where red stone met pale sky. His horse moved slow, weary, hooves stirring soft clouds of dust that trailed behind him like ghosts of all the miles he had crossed. Each breath he drew carried the dry taste of memory of rain, of thunder, of a woman's voice that still haunted the wind. He had left the Apache camp 2 days before, carrying nothing but the clothes on his back, the revolver at his hip, and a single feather tied to his wrist with sinew token Ayanna had given him before she turned away. That feather moved with every heartbeat, light as forgiveness, heavy as guilt. The world around him shimmered with heat, endless and alive. A sea of dust and silence that judged no one and forgave nothing. When the sun began to die in the west, he found himself in a dry riverbed known to travelers as Widow's Spine, a place cursed by stories of men who vanished chasing redemption. He dismounted and gathered brush for a fire, the twigs snapping like brittle bones in his hands. The flame caught slow, glowing against the dusk, casting long shadows that swayed and bent with the wind. He sat beside it, staring into the fire until faces began to form in the smokemen he'd killed. Choices he couldn't take back, the storm he couldn't outrun. Somewhere in that flickering light, he saw Ayanna's eyes again, dark, steady, filled with something that neither fear nor grief could erase. He had seen truth in her truth that cut deeper than any bullet. A faint sound pulled him from his thoughts, the distant rhythm of hooves, steady and light, moving through the stillness. He rose, hand resting on the grip of his gun, but he didn't draw. Out of the twilight came a shape, a rider, small against the burning sky, moving with grace that was almost unreal. As the figure drew closer, the dying sun caught her hair, and his breath caught in his chest. It was I. She stopped a few paces away, her horse breathing hard, its mane streaked with dust. Neither spoke at first. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of what had been lost, of what might still be found. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, carried by the wind. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, the words breaking rough from his throat. "I had to come," she answered. "The spirits sent the storm for a reason." He turned away, the firelight cutting sharp across his weathered face. "To punish me?" he asked. Ayanna shook her head. "To reveal you." For a moment, neither moved. The desert breathed around them, the light fading to deep amber. Then she rode forward, dismounted, and stepped close enough that he could see the reflection of the fire in her eyes. My father said a man would come who carried his own darkness but would still choose the light, she whispered. He said the spirits would know him by his sorrow. Colt's lips trembled, his voice barely a whisper. He was wrong about me. Ayanna reached out, touched the feather at his wrist, and spoke the 4 words that broke the silence of the desert and changed everything. The spirits forgive you. The wind, the fire bent low. And for the first time in his life, Colt Mercer closed his eyes and let the desert breathe him clean. Night fell over the desert like a slow exhale, the fire dying down to a heartbeat of embers, while the wind whispered low through the canyons. Ayanna stood beside Colt, her face lit by the soft glow, her eyes reflecting 1,000 unspoken things: loss, grace, defiance, and something deeper that neither dared name. The words she had spoken still hung in the air, alive as the flame itself. The spirits forgive you. They seemed to move through him, through the sand, through the very bones of the earth. For the first time in years, Colt Mercer felt something shift inside, a quiet breaking, a peace long denied. He sank to one knee, head bowed, not from weakness but from release. The wind rose briefly, brushing over them like the touch of unseen hands, carrying the smell of rain that wasn't there. Ayanna watched him, knowing this was no longer about tribes, vengeance, or law. This was the final reckoning between a man and the weight he carried. "What will you do now?" she asked softly. He lifted his gaze to the stars blooming across the sky, their light clean and cold above the dark land. "Ride," he said, "until the past stops following." She nodded, though her heart trembled. He reached for his hat, dusted it off, and looked toward the east, where the horizon began to glow faintly with the promise of dawn. Ayanna stepped forward and pressed something into his hand, the small charm of turquoise she'd worn since childhood. "Then let this remind you of where mercy found you," she said. He closed his fingers around it, unable to speak. In the distance, a coyote called, its cry echoing through the valley like a farewell. When Colt finally mounted his horse, he paused for a moment, looking down at her. The firelight painted her in gold and shadow, her braids moving softly in the wind. "You saved me," he said quietly. "No," she answered, "you listened." He nodded once, then turned the horse toward the horizon. The first light, morning, broke through the night, washing the desert in soft gold and red. Ayanna watched as the silhouette of man and horse grew smaller, swallowed by distance, until it became nothing but a shape moving between light and dust. She stood there long after he was gone, until the fire died and the sun climbed high above the cliffs. Somewhere beyond sight, Colt rode on past canyons carved by time, through ghost towns and riverbeds, through silence and memory, his shadow long upon the earth, but his soul lighter than it had ever been. The desert, ancient and endless, watched without judgment, as it always had, and though no one else would ever hear it, the wind carried the faintest echo of a woman's voice, soft, eternal, and full of grace, repeating the words that had set him free: "The spirits forgive you."